All right. Welcome to the session. I think we've already introduced Suren is the global head of cloud and automation for BAT, which is British American Tobacco. And Sina is from Group Information Security from Governance, Group AIA. So welcome everyone. I guess the session is more around the data sovereignty requirements from a local country perspective. And I'll open up this session generally with a general discussion around we often hear the term data sovereignty, right, in our day-to-day discussions. But I also hear terms like data residency, data localization. How do we interpret these three different terms: data sovereignty, data localization, data residency? Generally, what should we, how should we interpret, given that every country has a different requirement? You have Brunei, China, Indonesia, Nigeria, Russia, Vietnam, which have a pretty strict requirements. They have very specific requirements in terms of how the data should be stored, where the data should be stored on the servers. Uh, so how do we interpret these three different terms? Are these same? Are these different? Do they have overlap meanings? Or how do they line up, I'm say, from a privacy point of view?
So, so if I
Just
may,
a general discussion, and then to help set context for the next questions.
okay, if I may, Sina, uh, I guess there's an overlap between these three terms, right? So it always starts with data residency, meaning where do you want to keep your data? You know, very simply, whether you want to have it in education, you want to have something that has got to be done in terms of where it's located. Then you get into the sovereignty part of it, right? The sovereignty part, it's about the regulatory, how you want to utilize or implement your uh, or take advantage of the government laws in a certain country in terms of taxations, right? So sovereignty gets into the in-country regulations in terms of how you regulate data. Then comes localization, right? It's a subset of all the three, where it really drills down to PDPA, right? It's about how personal data protection acts in that country regulates how you would use that piece of data, specifically when it comes to personal data. So localizations all around personal data and how it's being used. And that's how I would differentiate in a very quick summary, right? Re- uh, Residency, it's about where. Sovereignty, it's about the regulations in that country in terms of benefits and taxations. And localization will be more in detail around, I would say, PDPA, right? Really understanding what are the rules and regulations
Right.
across PDPA. Yeah.
Right. Excellent. Sina, any views from you on this one?
Well, when it comes to the localization, there are, as you mentioned about the PDPA, so there are certain concern that sometimes there is an overlap between different countries, as you have mentioned, but usually there are certain certain standards that they are recommended when you are following that. To some extent, you can meet the requirement of the regulatories as well. But jurisdiction always is a different jurisdiction is always a challenge when it comes to data sovereignty. Which I'm going to discuss further detail when we are talking about cloud security and data sovereignty.
All right. Excellent. I think that brings me to the next question. Now that we have the context, and I'm sure both of your organizations have to align to PDPA, local country requirements. You operate in Malaysia, you operate in Sureen's organization operates in Europe as well. So we have GDPR there. So I'm sure AI also has a larger footprint, and you have to align to different requirements, country specific. So that brings me to the next question. I think I'll guide it to probably for Sureen in terms of from your day-to-day work. what regulations apply to you, and what would be your checklist in terms of, I would say, back of the pocket checklist to ensure data sovereignty requirements are identified and managed? I'm saying when we are operating in a multiple geography organization where different regulations apply, it becomes complex. And to simplify complex problems, it's easy to have kind of some basic rule set up, some checklist created, some top of the mind bullet points which you can dish out to your team saying, guys, these are the 10 best practices, follow these, and remaining we'll figure out in terms of specific countries, specific regulations. But these are the basic common criteria across it. So follow this. So help us understand from your organization point of view, from the position you are, how do you manage these scenarios which apply to your organization in cloud, multiple cloud? I'll leave it to you. I know it's a complex problem. It's rather complex to define itself as well. But I'll leave it to you. Help audiences a little bit with your views around how you manage this problem.
Okay, very, very good question, Tanvinder. I think we're a bit fortunate today versus a couple of years back due to the formation of GDPR, right? Even though GDPR started out from Europe, but I think it's been now an accepted standard across globally, right?
Absolutely.
So the underlining principles that the GDPR covers pretty much covers, I think about 5 or 6 fundamental areas in with respect to data, right? We're talking about along the lines of transparency, the purpose of how you utilize the data, where it's stored, around accountability, right? And very much on the lawfulness of how the data is being utilized. So in our organization, we follow the principles of GDPR because we are a global organization. We enforce and ensure it's governed. From a framework and tooling perspective, we follow guidelines of the Cloud Security Alliance as a guide in creating and enforcing the governance part of it. So we got the policies and what we need to achieve to make sure that it fits the different countries in terms of more on sovereignty and localization, right? In terms of residency, we decide where we want to put based on tax laws, tax benefits, and service charges, and all kinds of taxation rules that's placed by different countries, right? So it's a very holistic, and I would encourage our viewers or participants here that's attending here is if you are an organization that not just uses or involves personal data or actually data as a whole, right? Key data, IP data. We need to totally understand your data classification guidelines. Very, very key, right? You need to understand what is classified as public data, private data, secret data, right? Most critical data. There's different terms. But if you have an organization, there has to be someone that's going to be looking at data classification, right? And then based on the data classification, you basically help you with the guidelines of GDPR and CSA to actually streamline or group this data as to, looking at where it needs to be hosted, right? Because different areas in terms of cloud, we are a multi-cloud organization. So if you have zones that are price difference, between the US and the Europe and Asia, right? You got to think about latencies, right? And then comes the regulatory stuff because your business end users are very demanding. They don't see the back end. They just want to make sure everything's protected and done. So use GDPR, use CSA, even this ISAC. There's a few other organizations, but this is what we actually use as the guiding principle. And from there, you would be able to actually understand and see a better picture on the risk and how you would fulfill those key sovereignty issues for a global organization. Then I'll just add I think Tavin's trying to sync. Some questions I would ask, right, would be pretty much things like even down to the fact where you want to have a copy of your data, your backup, or your DR. All that matters. Yeah.
Yep.
So I'll stop there, Tavin.
I
And
guess
then
I'll probably interject here. I, I'll probably add on to it. This nuisance of uh, having the backup stored, the location for the backup, kind of most of the time gets overlooked. When you're looking at your production instance, you're looking at the production data, but you kind of fail to realize what's your backup strategy as an organization, how many times the backups are being taken, where are those getting stored, are they getting stored in under lock and key, in secured location within your organization, or has it been outsourced to a third party? What is the security posture of that third party? Is that third party compliant to your requirements or not? So I think this small nuisance, if I may call, or complexity around managing a large multi-country, multi-domain infrastructure sometimes gets overlooked, and I've seen organizations getting into trouble because of this.
yep, absolutely. Because cloud is so easy, right? You want a backup, you
Yep.
just tick. You want geolocation, you tick, right? But they
Yes.
seem to tick based on technical requirements,
Right.
right? When something goes wrong, that's where your legal and your data policy people will come into play, right? So that's those keys that need to be understood very
Yeah.
clearly. Yeah.
That's I would say googly in cricketing terms, where you don't expect, and then suddenly you have this problem on your table. But thanks, good insights there, Suren. I'll come to Sina, to you now. Suren, are we done with this answer, or is there anything else you would want to add?
Yeah. And one more single thing, right? Make sure your partners understands your business and understands your organization and understands the laws locally and globally, right? So that's very key, right? Because your partners, and we tend to not pay focus to that part of engaging in the SOW per se, or
Yes.
selecting in an RFP, right? We never put data classification or data privacy, or if you're GDPR compliant, or you're a CSA framework person, because these are all guidelines, right? If you are, let me know. I don't need to go and audit it, but I need to cite it, right? You need to tell me, right, if you are compliant or not, because that covers. If you are, we because there's an audit, just like ISO back in the days, there's somebody will make sure that you are, but you need to tell me whether you are or not, right?
Yeah.
Because it always becomes the after fact, right? And also understand there's something called the Cloud Act. Read up on the Cloud Act coming out from the US, right?
Right.
Because most of our cloud owners and principals are coming out from the US, right? That's very, very key. I encourage everyone to understand, especially in the data world. If you're advising any organization or corporates, understand the Cloud Act. A few court cases and all things very famous. A lot of regulations have been changed and now enforced in the Cloud Act. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Suren. I guess this makes more sense because from a Malaysia point of view, specifically from a country PDPA point of view, we have to figure out what mitigatory controls are we putting in, knowing that neither Amazon nor Azure has a local data center. And obviously, either it will be in Hong Kong or it will be in Singapore. So what are our local requirements from a Malaysia point of view, and how do we mitigate those, put mitigatory controls to be compliant to the local requirements? But thank you, Suren. Good insights
Most
there.
welcome. Most
Sina,
welcome.
coming to you. I see you sitting very quietly and just nodding your head. So here's your time.
I was
I'll put
enjoying
you on
the
the hot seat
insight
here.
from Sureendhran.
Third question.
Thanks for the input.
Yeah. I guess when Suren speaks, everybody just listens to him. So I guess I concur with you. But I'll probably a third one coming to you. And I touched upon this question in the
mentioned quite a number of the areas and challenges in regards of the cloud as well, and especially the data protection, the backup side for the data protection. And the point is that, as you mentioned, we always have a look on the production environment, but basically data sovereignty is not only about production. As you know, it's about entire data lifecycle, meaning that from the time that data has been created until the time that we are processing the data, storing the data. Also, it covers the backup side, destruction, and all of those, the entire end-to-end data lifecycle. So this is one of the parts that we are lacking on that, and sometimes we are in a blind side. But the point is that, so these are most of the challenges that we have when we are on the on-premise. When it comes to the cloud, always treat the cloud service providers like a third parties. The reason is that, so there are a number of the data that they are either processing for us or they are storing for us. Let's give you two different scenarios. Imagine that your cloud provider, the data is stored within Malaysia. Thumbs up, that is good. But the people that are using that data are outside Malaysia. For example, consider that we have a call center or marketing team that is hosted, for example, in a third country, be it Indonesia, Philippines, or whatsoever, right? So nowadays, a lot of digital marketing companies, although they are, for example, working for certain countries, but if they are hosted in Malaysia, meaning that the data is stored in Vietnam, in Philippines, in Indonesia, but the people that using that data are outside the country. I mean, this is one of the challenges that we should highlight. It's not only about where the data is stored. I mean, that's a term that I remember from the time that cloud came in. We always said, I don't know where my data is stored. But we forget about thinking that where my data is accessed, be it for the process or backup, report replication, or whatsoever. So that's why the life cycle should be considered end to end. Another way is that we store the data in another country, but we are using it inside the country. This is the second scenario that is happening, which is the most common one. For example, the data is stored in Australia, in Singapore, US, so whatsoever. But the point is that we always think that where is my data stored? And when we come to the PDPA, in fact, PDPA doesn't say that no data should go out. The main focus is on those confidential or PII, PCI kind of a data. So that's where, as even Sureendran mentioned, that we need to do the data classification. So that's where I always say that know your data. So when you know your data, what data you have, then you can manage it properly. But the problem is that even if you know your data and you want to classify it on a piece of paper, that is a wonderful policy line that know your data, classify it accordingly. But the real classification that you need to classify each single file and have a comprehensive inventory, classified data, that would be the challenge, because then you need to have a monitoring all of the data that's going in and out, and you need to have a proper data protection solution in place, such as DLPs. You need to be able to classify your data. Only then we can say that this policy can be enrolled. Otherwise, if you look at all of the companies, they say that data need to be classified. But if you ask the data, even the PDPA, it says that every company, they need to have a data protection officer. But if you go back to any of these data protection officer and says that, do you know how many confidential data do you have? Do you know how many unknown confidential data do you have, especially when it comes to unstructured data? So now taking back this topic to the cloud, so going back to the cloud, imagine that we have a third-party service, which is a cloud service provider. So that's why whenever we want to onboard any of those CSPs, we need to see that where the data is stored, who is going to access that. Even the administrator that's going to manage that server or that VM, he might be remotely sitting somewhere else. So we need to consider holistic view is not only the data processor team, let's say tax team or finance team, is also the administrator from the cloud that having access to my servers. So that's where I always say that consider the cloud provider as a third party, which then the SLA comes to the picture that whether they can meet. So all of those SLA should be considered. The SLA, the performance. And also another valid point that you need to add, because nowadays, even if recently Malaysia government announced that they're trying to invite investors to invest on cloud in Malaysia as well, which I can say that that's a good advantage, because then we don't need to have so much dependency on the tech giant companies such as AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, and any of them. So by encouraging the local companies to build their own cloud service provider. And following that, the certification comes to the picture, whether it's a PCI DSS, ISO 27000 series, and whatsoever. So is there any questions so far? I can go on and on. I'm afraid that we lost the time.
We all come from that breed which are passionate about talking. So most of the time when we're talking about the subjects we care about, we lose the time. So I think I mentioned to you a couple of important points. You touched upon the unstructured data repositories or unstructured data which most of the time is difficult. We don't realize what kind of data is there in our OneDrive, Google Drive, SharePoint Online, etc., etc. So that's one aspect which worries me most of the time. And probably next 1 or 2 minutes, how do we manage those scenarios, and specifically around the unstructured data aspect of it. And then probably I would also want to touch upon Sureen and Sina, both your inputs on this restriction around flow of data. I shouldn't be saying restriction, but I think this control around the flow of data because of these rules which want data to be localized on account of the sovereignty requirements. How is it going to impact, or do you think it's impacting the e-com ecosystem because the data cannot flow across? I know there are going to be concerns around free flowing of data, but the question is specifically around these mismatches between different regulations, not having one global governance framework to manage the data. Is it impacting the e-com aspect of businesses? So first, unstructured data, managing the unstructured data repositories, and second is then the free flow of the data, and how is it impacting, or is it impacting the e-com aspect of things without compromising the privacy of the users?
Sina, please.
So when it comes to this restriction data flow that you have mentioned, I think that we should not only look at it from the business perspective, we should also look at it from the user, or let's say customer, or even people perspective as well. Even during these days, so we are having because of the COVID situation, imagine as an individual, whenever I need to go, I need to register my name, put my name down there. And many of those, even let's say the restaurants, that pubs, or that grocery shopping that I'm going, that many of them, they are not even regulated. And all of them, they have the confidential information of mine, which is the date, the time, the phone number, full name, IC number. Either you write it on a piece of paper, and imagine that just that notebook was to get lost, right? So when it comes to this data life cycle and workflow, yes, it should be awareness as well to know the risk. So that's where the best part comes, that the customer or the people should give their consent. When the consent comes to the picture, it's ease up the process, which many of the area we don't share our consents, such as the recruiter companies. I mean, just giving the example that come to my mind, that a lot of recruiter companies, they get our resume, which contains a lot of sensitive information over there. So because they want to help us, for example, to get a job, so they are going to circulate all of those resume among their agents and different agencies, which we have no oversee on that. So that's why the third party, fourth party, and fifth party agencies come to the picture, that we lose our oversight. That makes the restriction, requires the restriction to be able to manage this data flow.
Fair enough. I think fair point. And when you're talking about the grocery stores, I think one example there more is they have most of our information, phone numbers, sometimes email IDs, time in, time out. And they also have our pictures through their video cameras. So they know the person face. They can probably then, looking at the AI now and the big data, everything can be correlated with our profiles available on LinkedIn, on Facebooks, on Twitters, and it could be a serious problem.
Correct.
I just want to add, don't forget,
awareness is required to let the people know that you are at risk.
and don't forget, IoT.
Yep.
Right? Your sensors are catching as you're walking. You don't even know that you're being tracked. And I think we need to enforce cybersecurity laws now to the IoTs. Right? I think very key.
Fair point, Sureen. Now, since IT and OT are now creating an overlap, there is a joint connect between them. Earlier, it used to be air gap. So the assumption was that the perpetrators or rogue elements will not be able to connect with my OT network because it's air gap. But now with IT getting connected, I think we've opened up that highway where anybody can misuse the access. And OT has not been developed with keeping security in mind. It's been developed keeping mission criticality in mind. So
So answering your question, right? It's about money. It's about business. It's about data being the black gold, right? There is you restrict flows, somebody's going to be impacted. But I think it's about ownership, right? The person who's collecting data needs to do that. We could have framework, governance, enforcements, but it all comes down to the accountability of that individual who's actually that data life cycle that Sina talked about, right? Who's creating that data to make sure that it's governed, it's limited, it follows the lawfulness, like whatever the principles of GDPR is, right? But it's just that those people are not being accountable. They are going on a floodgate and saying that, oh, it's going to be worth so much money. I'll think about it later. And then they just go out and collect data and start selling data. Right?
Fair enough. I think we just over the time, we probably end it. But I with the parting note that a compromise in IT leads to business disruption, but a compromise in OT leads to loss of life. It could lead to loss of life. Yep. So it's critical that we keep that in mind when we're talking about OT. I think with that, we over the time, but pretty interesting discussion. I wish we had more time, and I look forward to having another opportunity to continue this discussion. But until then, Sureen, Sina, thank you very much for your time. I guess we were able to add some value to the listeners as well, and hopefully looking forward to future opportunities.
Sure.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Sena. Thank you, Tanvinder.
Thank you.